Hey, it's Mike Henry with Follower of One. I want to welcome you to today's show, our Here I Am show. And today I have two friends, a new friend and an old friend. Roger's on here with us. And then I want to introduce you to Dennis Allen. Dennis, would you say hi and tell people a little bit about what you do and what we're planning to talk about today?
Thanks, Mike. Sorry I couldn't be there with you in person. That would be a lot of fun too. So I'm a guy who's really concerned about the trajectory and trend of the disciples following Christ in the church. If you put me on a bio line, I'm a husband to a beautiful bride named Karen. I'm a dad to two kids that never call home enough, but are grown and gone. Um, I'm a guy who has been in the business world for a while. I guess the trick line would be I'm in corporate repentance, which means I work on trying to help turn companies around, particularly the middle market and industrial companies. My resume kind of reads like an attention deficit disorder nightmare just because of the different kinds of companies I've been in. Although, Mike, after listening to you, I don't think I've got anything to brag about at all on that one. And then before the business world, I was in the Air Force. So my job there was to try to introduce enemy pilots to Jesus. And I'll just leave that at that. And you guys can pick on anything you want there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And part of the reason why we're talking today is because of the disciple dilemma, right? That's your new book that will be coming out soon.
That's the first book. That's the book. That's the center of the universe in my life lately, trying to get that thing out the door.
Well, tell us about it.
So the tagline is for the Christian community, we've been hacked. Um, the Lord gave us this operating system. It's a really terrific operating system. This operating system is something that He designed and intended to have deployed around the world. It's a communication and messaging system.
Hmm.
It is a compassion and concern and caring system. It is a system that's designed to operate in very hazardous environments, whether it's just cancel culture, condemnation, hatred, oppression, poverty, disease. It's designed to operate in all those kinds of environments. It's a fault tolerant system. It's
Yeah.
designed to be able to be restored once it's crashed and bugged itself up and messed itself up. And all that sounds really good, but there's this problem. And the problem is that if you go back about 1800 years, you find that we've been introducing a virus into the operating system software in the form of a number of old traditions, not all traditions, but some traditions. And these old traditions, we got 6 in the book, say that they are the right way to do things, except they're the wrong way to do that operating system, which
Hmm.
is what the book's about disciples, how you make them, how you are them, how you go out and help people become them. So this is about the virus. It's a book for leaders. It's not really a book to tell you how to be a disciple. It's a book for leaders to understand if we as leaders, whether you lead one person or whether you lead thousands of people, if we as leaders don't check in to lead, we can't break the traditions
Hmm.
and we can't get away from the problems that they induce. So there are I guess 3 terms I'd leave us with to talk about today. One is the symptoms that led us to the conclusion we needed to write the disciple dilemma, the traditions themselves, what they are, and then a path forward, where we go and what we do to try to make something out of this mess that we find ourselves in. How's that for a start?
That's good.
Perfect. And that and $4 to get you a vanilla latte. So here's my question for you, Dennis. Maybe let's just start with that whole symptoms thing, right? Because, we're all in business. If we can't clearly define the problem, we've got trouble coming up with a strategy or tactics to get us where we need to go. Maybe just pick one. I'm just curious. If you were to say, well, here's the most prescient issue that is that you see, what is that? And just out of curiosity, and I'm going to kind of make this a complex thing. I know that your heart is connecting Sunday morning and Monday morning, right? We're business people and we're Christians, and a big chunk of your book parallels what we do as leaders in business with what we do as leaders of disciples. Just curious, what do you, is there a most pressing issue of
So let
the
me answer the
perhaps the,
second part of the
you,
question first, and then come back to that
yeah,
specific symptom. The way this got started was that a bunch of theological thugs in Oxford, UK, at the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics, forced on each of us a requirement, something we had to do. Now, Mike, for your friend Roger, all he had to do was play the piano on his London subway, which he did, amazed all of us, and he was done. I got stuck with this book, so I got the raw end of the deal. But this book came from my experience in the business world as I work with people. People are yeah, that's the issue. That's always the thing, whether it's business or Christian community, it's people. And I started noticing this eerie similarity between the problems that I was tackling as a business person so that people understood who they were, why they were there, what they were supposed to do, how they were supposed to get better, how they could improve their own lives. And I started noticing this is going on around the churches that I'm involved with, right? Things are just not well. People turn over, people walk out, people burn out, people go quiet, people give up, people don't feel qualified. And I started thinking, this is odd. I'm seeing this in business and I'm seeing this in Christianity. And it began to dawn on me that there was a lot of research out there about both the history of the church and what's going on. So to the symptom that Roger asked for, I've got, a handful of symptoms that I could chat about now, but to keep from putting everybody to sleep, let me just pick one. Roger told me to pick one, so I'll do that. And this one's pretty obvious around Christian community today, and it comes from a number of scholarly research houses. I didn't just dream this up after eating too much pizza. This is Pew, this is Barna, this is International Center for Research Studies, this is even the UK Humanist Society. And the statistic is this: in the Western Christian community, 6 out of 10 millennials have walked off the church grid or are walking off the church grid. The term is nones and dones, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N, N-O-N-E-S, none, I've got nothing else to do with the church, or dones, I'm completely gone and I'm not coming back. 6 out of 10. So there's one symptom, Roger, and we could ask ourselves the question, is anything wrong with that? And in the business world, it's the same problem. Churn and turnover are huge. But back to the discipleship problem, should we be seeing that many people walking out the door?
yeah. Well, and given I got my master's degree in apologetics, just to take that symptom and give it an angle from a different perspective, in the 18 to 24 age range, just left high school, move off to college, the single largest problem of that symptom that manifests is I didn't get my questions answered. I asked my pastor the tough question about whatever, and I didn't get my questions answered. And which is part of why I'm so excited about your book, because the world doesn't need more advertising or info barf or shouting. Discipleship is the answer.
It's the building block. It's the foundation stone of all things Christ meant for the church to be. In other words, the church doesn't exist without disciples. Mission doesn't exist without disciples. Worship doesn't exist without disciples. And so I'm with you. This is the cellular building block of the macro system. And each one of us has that operating system in us. And the younger crowd, especially, but the boomers and the millennials are struggling with the same problem. This is too mean. This is too demanding. This isn't fair. I don't like the things they expect of us or the way that they have categorized certain people or certain things.
Okay.
And so I guess my closing point on this one would be that's the sort of culture and environment that you see and hear with a lot of people. I use the term 6 out of 10, but if you drop down to Roger's category, it's closer to 8 out of 10, right, in the Gen Zs. And what they're saying is, I've never been taught differently, so I get to go with what I like, not with what I'm supposed to be.
Well, and I want to ask a question real quick of both of you. Let's make sure that we have a good working definition here. What are we calling discipleship? Because one of the things I've learned is all the words have a lot of meanings associated with them, and everyone may not share the same meaning that we're using today.
That's a great
I'm
question.
referring to
And
the
since
more
you wrote the
handsome
book,
guy with a goatee.
no, since you wrote the book, why don't you define it the way that you're going to define it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to freak some people out in the book. And the reason why I'm doing that is I'm trying to get away from traditional language so that we don't find ourselves trapped in, oh, I think I understand that, but I don't. So to Mike's point, let's try to define our terms. The term disciple was what everybody who followed Jesus around was called until they got to Antioch, and finally they labeled them Christians. But the reality is, those people who were disciples weren't believers when they were following Jesus around. None of them were believers. Now, that's going to freak some people out. But this is the sequence of discipleship. People get invited. Think about Jesus inviting his 12 and many more. They weren't believers. They didn't even really know who he was. They thought he was cool, but they didn't know who he was. You're invited. You start following. You start evaluating. You come to a point where you realize who this is, and there's surrender, and then there's all the rest of your life following, surrendered, following, surrendered. So a disciple isn't a status. A disciple is a little more like a neutrino. A neutrino cannot be measured in its weight or its resume. A neutrino can only be measured in its velocity. A disciple is following Christ. And so that's the argument through the book. We want leaders creating cultures that keep disciples in the follow mode of Christ. Helpful?
Yeah.
It's helpful to me.
Say this. I love the fact that you just want to challenge language. For instance, unrelated research, but research shows that the vast majority of people, even people in our pews, don't really know how to define the word evangelical. Does that mean a set of beliefs? Does that mean a political party? There's a great example. So thank you. That's a great definition.
So a couple of other symptoms that tag on to this. These are symptoms. This isn't what the big iceberg underneath the water is all about. This is the tip of the iceberg. So this is what we see. Concierge Christianity is a real problem today. You walk in, you were talking about a latte earlier, right? It's hit the pew, catch the sermon, sing the fun songs, and I'm good for the week. 8 out of 10 believers in the Protestant church in the United States today live that way. They occasionally attend sermons or Sunday school. 8 out of 10 do not have anything other than that. They have no small group. They have no Bible study. They have no fellowship. 8 out of 10. On the other end of the spectrum, which is also fascinating, 8 out of 10 Protestants in Western Christianity, according to these surveys and studies, do not think it is their job, nor do they really believe Jesus is the exclusive way for their job to declare what Christianity is all about. So it's not my job. I don't really believe Jesus is the only way, and I'm not really comfortable talking about it. Something's not right with those symptoms.
Yeah. And in Gen Z, even a segment of them who are believing that to proselytize or declare truth is morally wrong, right? A form of that delivering a value or a truth proposition is a form of microaggression. We'll have to come back to that at another time. Mike, I saw you smirking. Weigh in. I know you got
Roger,
a thought or two hanging around up there.
This all lines up with what we talk about. So part of the reason why we call it the organization that we're a part of, Follower of One, is because all these words have different meanings. And so, Dennis, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Our job is to follow Jesus. And I always talk about the job of a minister is someone who's helping other people move one notch closer to Jesus. That ministry is just helping people move closer to him, because following him is the plan. It's the strategy. And so I appreciate what you're sharing. And I agree with you too, that much of what we do in and around church and many of the ways that our culture thinks that Christians are supposed to behave kind of contributes to this problem where the behavior becomes separate than the actual act of following Jesus. So what are some ways that we can get back to following Jesus? What are some good ideas that you might recommend to someone who just says, okay, well, I don't want to play the church game anymore, but what do I do just to follow Jesus?
Well, I think the first thing that I would want to do is I would want to walk over to the leadership in that person's Christian community, and I'd want to put my arm around them and say, what you're looking at over there is the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing the symptoms. Now, you can chase that symptom. You can walk over to this person. You can say, you need to do this, you need to do that,
Mm-hmm.
you need to think more like this, you need to behave more like that. At the end of the day, if we don't go underneath the tip of the iceberg and start busting up the big behemoth that's below the surface, which are these traditions,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll tell you one of them in just a moment, we can't solve the symptoms. It's like blowing your nose when you have a cold and hoping that cures you. You can blow the nose, but you're not going to clear the cold.
Yeah.
And in this situation, when you think about Roger's work from the apologetic community, this is beautiful because he's interacting with people and he's connecting with hearts, and he's hopefully helping these people to understand in a more thoughtful way who is Christ and what does Christ offer and mean. The book is trying to say at a macro level, leaders, whether these are pastors, small group leaders, deacons, trustees, elders, committee chairs, people who are just informal leaders in the church, or somebody who's discipling one person, you need to go after the traditions. You have to attack the traditions. So, for example, one tradition dating all the way back to the 2nd century is one called optional lordship, which means, hey, I want Jesus to save me, but this thing about lordship, I don't really want to worry about that right now. I'll consider that upgrade later on. And Roger and I were listening to Sam Albury talk in Oxford a couple of years back, and one of his quotes, which I think is fascinating, was, I really like being a fan of Jesus, not so much the surrendered and lordship part. Now, if you specifically ask me to walk over and talk to this person, I'm going to start having a conversation about Jesus's statements. Pick Matthew 10, pick Matthew 18, or grab Paul's stuff in Colossians 3 saying, you've got to die.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to just die to yourself. You've got to kill your personal agenda. Now, if I'm a product of conversionism, don't confuse that with the idea of becoming a believer, of being converted to Christianity. But if I'm a product of conversionism, which is get people saved, promptly abandon them, and move on to the next person you want to convert. If I'm a product of conversionism, I probably have never encountered the reality of what it means to follow Jesus. I got the small terms, fast talking advertisement that said, take this prayer, say it, you're cleaned up, life's good, go back to doing what you were doing. People have to recognize what is followership, what is death to self, what is picking up a cross. And this is on leaders to bring alive in the cultures of Christian communities. It's not the fault of the people who don't know it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I was going to ask you about conversionism from the notes, so I'm glad you explained that as well. I think that's a great illustration. Roger, what do you think about all that?
Well, I'm still, my brain's spinning on the using different language and perhaps even how much we use, we speak churchianity and how that just, goes over the top of some people's heads. I think it was, I think I probably heard it first from Ravi Zacharias, who said we used to be able to use Christian idioms to talk about secular situations, and now we have to use secular idioms to talk about spiritual things. But I'll share this with you because my answer to your question, Mike, is even one about addressing fundamental things like what is truth, or how do we know this Jesus? This literally, I took a screenshot of this. I literally saw this on Facebook yesterday. My wife and I are coming out of blah, 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 deep process of deconstructing. We want badly to believe in an all-loving and affirming God, we don't know what to do with all the scriptures that challenge that belief. Feeling unsure, anyway, basically goes on to say, and I'm going to use the academic word that is describing the nuns and it was not the nuns and
Duns.
Nuns and duns.
Right? The nuns and the duns, right? Moralistic therapeutic deism, right? How do you know Jesus? And so even just talking about the nature of what is truth, or being able to do that. And this is why I think discipleship is so powerful, because if you're a leader in any context, you probably, experientially know that one of your challenges is that you've got to earn the right to be heard. And, we can't do that in sound bites. It's going to take an investment. And maybe that's one of the challenges. In fact, I'll ask both of you. You both manage bigger organizations than me. What is the nature of the cost of time to be a discipler?
Go ahead, Dennis. I'm going to pull up Dale's comment. Dale just commented on here too. I'm going to pull that up.
Yeah, please send all heresies to Roger. I would say, in terms of the cost factor, Roger, if I understood your question, you're really bringing up the point, what do we have to grasp to understand discipleship? Is that where you were going?
Well, and I was just saying, to be a discipler, there is a cost, right? Because it's relational, not transactional.
Meaning, yes, it is.
You've got to make a decision.
I think that's the great point you're making. We have an idea in Western Christianity that we can do mass production discipleship. And that's one of the pieces that I tried to bring out in the book, right? So in that, it's like, if I can just set up this program, if I can just get this recipe instituted, if I can just get a really good sermon series, if I can just send people on a mission trip or put them in a small group, we've got disciples. And that's novel, but it's not biblical. The reality of discipleship is parenthood is forever, right? When I start sharing the gospel with people and they come to Christ, I don't get to just toss them in the orphanage and hope everything works out okay. I'm in a lifelong relationship with those people. And that's crucial for us to be able to understand that most mass production Christianity is about one person in a pulpit speaking to many people out in the church. Don't take that as an insult against sermons. Paul told us to equip people and to do that as pastors and teachers and so on. But it's relational. And so Roger's point about cost, hey, I'm always glad to write a check. I'm happy to actually catch a YouTube cast once in a while like this, right? But don't ask me to live life out with somebody. That's inconvenient.
Well, I think too, I agree with you. I believe that we focus on the mass production things because we have X number of staff. We have this group of people that I always joked about how when I was not on staff, that the staff people were paid to be good and I was good for nothing. And so we have this small group of people who are paid to be good, and we try and maximize all the good that they can smear around. And we see this as like this distribution channel. And I think that's just a misunderstanding, right? These are more the baggage or the hacks that you were talking about that get in the way of just thinking about my life following Jesus. If I follow Jesus and do what he says, it may not look like what my pastor's wanting everyone to do today.
Mike, a compliment. And because Mike baked this into the ethos and actually even the process in Follower of One when we lead these marketplace mission trips. Because in some sense, this is one way that of being a follower of Jesus in the marketplace is, going to present us some choices that we're going to need to make. If efficiency or effectiveness is one of the things that drives how we think about the bottom line, the top line, the quarterly business reports, et cetera, then we're always trying to maximize return on assets in a way.
Yeah.
Meaning giving ourselves the margin to serve people or take extra time to say, how was your weekend? Or can I pray for you? Isn't really, I mean, in a sense, sounds like that's at odds with, a lot of what we do in the business world. Just curious, Mike, if there was something in particular in your life that brought that out, and then kick it over to Dennis and say, Dennis, how does that touch down with what you've talked about in your book?
Well, for me, it starts with the idea that what I'm doing now must be something ordained by Jesus. I'm not powerful enough, I don't believe, to get so totally outside of his will unless he's telling me to stop. So when I went to work, how does my work life count as part of my eternal life instead of just being a time waste until I can go do something spiritual? And that's when I started coming up with the ideas, the 5 daily activities that we talk about in the community. So I just didn't want to waste the time. I didn't want to just stay out of trouble till Sunday.
I don't have to. So Dennis, I'll kick that over to you because I really love this, but the issues in the book that you outline, the kind of the 6 biggies, you say, hey, here's kind of part of the church tradition and here's a business parallel, but you wrote the book for Christian leaders, right? Am I remembering correctly?
Yep.
And if so, I'm just curious how some of these ideas may touch down, with regard to how somebody lives out their faith in the workplace.
So as you arc on through the book, one of the things that we're trying to focus people on is that you as a disciple live in spheres. Abraham Kuyper, a fascinating theologian and, by the way, an ambassador to the U.S. from Belgium, talked about sphere sovereignty. And what that meant was think about bubbles of your life and how they intersect with the greater world. So to point to Roger's issue, we have a vocational sphere. This is who we are gifted as in Christ professionally, what we're supposed to do. I might be good at landscaping, I might be good at brain surgery, but whatever I'm called to be, there's my vocational set, right? Mm-hmm. And then I have a missional sphere. This is sort of my non-professional, but my dedicated time serving in the missional arena. There's a civic arena. But when you think about the vocational, I think Christianity today, popularly in the Western culture, is about keep your head down, stay in the foxhole Monday through Friday, get through it, and go back and get loud and proud on Sundays. In other words, it's tribal, where the book is attempting to say to leaders, we've got to help our people break free from their own shackles that say, you've got to be quiet in the workplace. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't mean I have to be an evangelist. Not all of us are evangelists, but what it does mean is I've got to be a little bit weird. My life's got to be different enough so people will go, who are you? And it's 1 Peter 3:15, our moniker verse from Oxford, Roger, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that's in you. We have to help leaders learn how to change the culture of mass production of disciples and to start taking those traditions out, which, by the way, look very similar to the traditions in the business world that I fight, but they're not exactly the same. These are spiritual traditions. Take those traditions out so that our people can be liberated to be the disciples, following Christ, surrendered, dead to self, dedicated, doulos, the bondservants that Christ called us to be, because that's who we are. We are not our own. We are servants of the living God, Monday through Friday, as well as Sunday in church.
Yeah. And let me take a second real quick, and I want to acknowledge some of our commenters. We have listeners on here from Croatia, Joe and Marco, and we have Dale Young and Rhonda on here. And Joe from Croatia asked this question. So what does relational discipleship look like in everyday life?
Joe, I'm going to see you in a couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about this a lot, aren't we? So thank you for asking that question. The relational side of things is such a mystery to the modern world because we think about just doing something with friends and moving on, where relational discipleship is not that. Now, let me go to the other side of the road. There's a ditch on both sides. One side of the ditch is casual and rare interactions with people, and I don't really know you, but we like each other and we talk once in a while. At the other side of the ditch comes this classic men's accountability group. I look at you with an intense and harsh stare and I say, how many times have you looked at pornography this week? And are you lying to me? And then I go home feeling like we've just had some discipleship time. Both of those ditches define the road to some degree, but the following, the relationship that we're all to be about is close aboard friends, people who I may not talk to you every day, but you know my pulse. The phrase that I've used before is, and I stole this from one of my pastoral buddies years ago, 2 a.m. Waffle House friends. I can always call you at 2 a.m., tell you to meet me in back of the Waffle House, bring a shovel, and don't ask questions. And it's okay. You know me, and it will be all right. Relationship is about life. It's about my failures as well as my successes. It is not about looking good. Roger and I have a discipling relationship simply because we've been together in a really interesting place. And while we don't spend lots of time together, Roger can look at me and say, your head's not all together right now, dude. And he knows it. Relationship needs to be persistent, lifelong, and we need to be close to each other, not for shine and not for image, but for real life. That's what it's about. And we spent a whole chapter of the book talking about that close in formational flying. We used fighter jets as a illustration in there, flying in formation like the Thunderbirds, or staying close together with each other to protect each other and guard each other and help each other, not to look good.
Very cool. Roger, would you
I'll
add
take a
anything?
stab at that too. Thank you, Joe, for the question. Let me, this is just come in at the same thing from a different angle. I come from a tradition where being confessional is part of that, right? Doesn't have to be the men's accountability group thing that that's the getting in your face thing. And yet, the Bible is clear about calling us to confess our sins one to another.
Yeah.
There has never been a time in my life, ever once, when I haven't humbled myself to confess sin, where I didn't meet the grace of Jesus in the person sitting across the breakfast table from me. And if there is something, to Joe's point, what does relational discipleship look like? I know that many times when we're in the life of people, particularly even in the workplace, when they bring something up that they think isn't holy enough for Christians, and they're met with love and grace, that surprises the living baloney out of them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a powerful thing right there. It's just a be grace.
And what is the culture of most places that you have been? In other words, what's the default thinking by people sitting at that table when they bring up their situation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, good parallel between, or, point of contrast between Christianity and business, right? In business, we're performance oriented. And I'm not saying businesses shouldn't be performance oriented, but it is diametrically opposite to an identity that is received rather than achieved, because grace has nothing to do with anything that I did, which is quite fortunate because I don't measure up.
Yeah.
But I think part of that culture of that table, that breakfast table, is just a perspective of humility. There isn't a person that I know in that context who isn't sitting there going, yeah, I struggle with stuff too. Right? Hypocrisy is for people who put on shows. The closer I get to Jesus and the more clearly I see him, the more I want to respond like Isaiah did when he had the vision of the throne in Isaiah 6, right? And he goes, woe is me, because I'm a man of unclean lips. And I don't care what you just looked at on the internet yesterday, because whether that's my issue or not, I'm there too. We all need a savior.
Yeah, I agree with you, Roger. I think that the challenge that we have, right, is to is to remember that we're in the same boat. That, I see relational discipleship as joining our friends in whatever situation they're in, and trying to move one notch closer to Jesus together. And I think what happens is that we judge other people's position or their actions or the things that they do, their perceptions, or even their own understanding about the faith or about Jesus. And we use that as a separation. And I do it. I'll do it again in minutes, I'm sure. But I don't want to. I want to be someone who's encouraging other people. Let's keep, looking for our Savior and following Him. So I think trying to help everyone wherever they are.
So the challenge that I'm trying to put on the table for the Christian leadership community is there are traditional ways of doing things that we have to dig out. We're going to have to take the long road. This is going to be growing a pine tree, not microwaving a pizza. It's going to take time. It's going to take time. And there's going to be some people that don't like what's going on because it's not the way we've always traditionally done things. But these traditions, like optional lordship being one, going to Roger's point earlier, not doing the main thing, but doing the not main thing. And by the way, this kills businesses as quickly as it kills Christian community. In all of my turnaround situations, one of the common threads in companies that are in trouble is they no longer know who they are. And therefore the employees don't know who they are. And therefore all the folks who are doing what they're doing are doing what they're doing, but they aren't sure why they're doing it. And there's a lot of people leaving because they don't know what they're doing. So it's true, we have to have metrics to say, well, do I have enough money in the checking account to pay the electric bill? But that's not the main thing. And the number of baptisms isn't the main thing. And the number of converts isn't the main thing. It is, do we have disciples making disciples? Mm-hmm. And if we're doing the main thing, if our leadership is building a culture to make the main thing, again, the main thing, go to all nationalities, to all nations, and make disciples, then we're doing the main thing, and all the administrative other things can be the secondary things, not the main thing.
Yes.
That's the thing.
Well said. Well said. I agree. So one of the other questions I wanted to ask you is related to something that Dale mentioned. And he was talking about how he was one of those conversionism people. He said that he was one of those converted back when he was 25 and then promptly turned away for almost another 20 years before he became a follower. How can we kind of help the church? What's an action that we can take, besides what we're doing already, to help the church, the body of Christ, right? Not necessarily the organized organizations, kind of switch out of this conversionism mode?
So I don't know Dale's story completely, but I'm going to go along and try to take a shot at what I think this kind of statement implies. And it connects with Joe from Croatia's question a minute ago. Most of the cultures in most of the churches we researched, we've looked at about 500 churches as we put the book together. We talked about their mission statements. We talked about the size of their leadership and so on. Most of the church cultures that we experience kind of follow the Lausanne Conference, 1974, which is evangelism first, and there's some fine print about discipleship at the back of the book. The point of this is that the idea is get them converted. If we just get them saved, everything's going to be great. Now, if I'm Dale and I become converted, and now suddenly I'm sitting on the side of the road and they drop me off and they say, have a great life, here's a Bible. And I'm alone, that's a pretty lonely road, right? Mm-hmm. And secondly, if I'm an immature, under-discipled, new believer, there's a lot of bad stuff floating around in the space out there to contaminate my brain. Some claiming to be Christian, some claiming to attack what Christianity is all about. And all of it begins to get in your head, right? And eventually you go, I've signed up with a cult. This is a bunch of whack jobs and I got to get out of here and I don't want to be a part of this. Or I'm just seeing hypocrisy. Now, I think all of us probably listening on the podcast would go, duh, every one of us is a hypocrite and a liar. And we can go on with all these lists, right? But the reality is relationship. No, I got a bigger hand than you do. The point of this is who helped Dale meet Christ? And whoever helped Dale meet Christ, where were they and what did they do and how did they relate and how did this all come together so that Dale was able to watch someone walking ahead of him through life and gaining and growing and taking some knocks and falling down some, and it's still okay, and having good reasons for the hope within.
Yeah.
I think that's important for somebody like Dale. And that's on leaders. If leadership doesn't build a culture that designs and develops and deploys that, a lot more Dales are going to get dropped off in the pastures.
Yeah. Roger, what would you add?
This is more of a question than it is an answer, but an observation that I think would be biblically accurate would be this. There isn't a qualification in the Bible about when, after you become a believer, when you're now charged with going, baptizing, and discipling, right? So we are all leaders and we're all followers all at the same time, right? Jesus heals the blind guy. What happens? I don't know. I don't know who he is. I don't know what happened. All I know is that I was blind and now I see. And I think there is a strain of, I'll just call it a problem, where we think that you have to have an MDiv or something to then be qualified to tell somebody about Jesus. And so, some part of what probably implicitly gets communicated is we get the professional class of Christian people and then the rest of everybody, as opposed to I think this is consistent with Dennis's point, going, wow, if you were there, not just at the point of conversion, but you started walking alongside somebody, what they're going to see you do is have a conversation on the golf course or at the grocery store or in the lunchroom that just happens to represent Jesus, that isn't part of finishing this 13-week series on
whatever.
One of the traditions that we talked about in the book is called clerical distancing. You think about social distancing, clerical distancing. And we talked about it using the example of a very important bishop named Basil. And he had a group of guys called the core bishops. Core was term for country bishops. They didn't have enough professional seminary folks to go out into the countryside. And besides the metro bishops, they were actually called metro bishops, they didn't want to go out in the country. They wanted to hang around in the city. And you found that they got mad because of the fact that the younger, less mature disciples were taking up some of the glory and some of the space. And they started trying to push these people away, saying, if you don't have the professional credentials, you can't do all these things. Then you have the people in the pews going, oh, this isn't my job. I don't have to walk alongside these people. So, hey, I like this. Could I have another latte, please? And then we just move right back into the whole regime of, if you don't have the degree, you have no role as a disciple. And by the way, enjoy your vacation in the pew.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've done a lot to help people believe that they're not qualified, so that we've got to have this. I love that term, clerical distancing. I may borrow that one.
Go for it.
So I think it's interesting too, because I always thought that we make the first steps very hard. I like the story of the man who had the legion of demons expelled from him. And he tried to leave that region with Jesus when they ran Jesus off. And Jesus said, no, you go back to your hometown. I always tell Roger, the guy just got one sentence of seminary. You go back to your hometown and you tell everyone what the Lord did for you and how he had mercy on you. And with that, you're a missionary. So I thought that was interesting. I've felt like I had to quit my job, or I had to, do something else. I had to do something radical or drastic to become a disciple maker. And finally just realized, no, there are people around me right now that I can help. And so just start looking for those as I'm following Jesus. Well,
One
So,
other tradition that we threw in the mix
sure.
was one that we called herd community. So if you think about herd immunity, herd community, it's the idea that if you just put enough people together in a room, discipleship will slosh into existence. It's a little like a perverse play on evolution.
Mm-hmm.
The old idea in macroevolution is from the goo to the zoo to you. You slosh enough, you'll get a life out of it, right? And so in herd community, it is slosh enough people together in the church, and you'll have disciples. That's not biblical.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about the fact that you need to be in relationship. You need to participate. You have a role and a place and a calling as a disciple. And the pros are there to help coach and make you better. They're your offensive and defensive coordinators on the
Mm-hmm.
sidelines, and we like them and we want them and we need them. And they can help us untangle gnarly questions. That's, Roger's got the certificate and the degrees and the apologetics background to do that sort of thing. We need him. We need people like that. And
Yes.
we also need our butts out on the field playing,
Mm-hmm.
not clerically distancing and saying, that's up to the pros. That's not my job.
Yeah, I agree.
so Dennis, where would you say that should begin to touch down here as we move into the home stretch of our time here together today? Um, in fact, I'm going to just point out one of the chapters of your book has the title of The Duty of Leaders. And, I know in a sense with your background that says, that includes serving in the military, thank you. The duty is maybe part of that domain. But there's a lot of people that don't like the word duty or servant or doulos or or a slave. What? I serve other people? No, I stand up and declare who I am. What? Where would you go in terms of somebody growing in their sense of duty as a leader? What would you have them do?
So this is one of the things that sort of parallels, I think, in the church as well as the business world. A lot of times I walk into a company that's upside down. Things aren't working well. So let's just consider that paradigm with the church right now, the idea that the culture for discipleship is not working well. There are going to be some people who are just not going to need to stay on the bus, to borrow from Collins, from good to great. They're on the bus. They don't need to be on the bus. They need to lead the bus. Some people are in the wrong seats on the bus, but all leaders need to recognize this is a pretty non-negotiable demand from Christ, that we all are disciples. Some are evangelists, some are preachers. Everybody's a disciple. Everybody follows. Everybody relates to somebody. Everybody teams up. You don't go solo. And in that, the leaders have to be willing to turn to a church and say, we need to tweak some things here. We aren't in our muscle memory, in our reflexes, in our cultural DNA. We need to have everybody be able to sit down and talk to each other about sin and not turn it into a gossip session. We need to have people willing to surrender and stand down. And so if I'm catching where you're coming from with this, Roger, we need leaders who are willing to follow. We need leaders who are willing to be weak and foolish in the ways that the world works, to say, I'm going to lead by being weak and foolish. I'm following Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Christ's plan doesn't look like a takeover from Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts. It looks like an entirely weird, different situation where leaders coach people to be different. I mean, think about a coach on the football field saying, when they snap the ball, lay down. Now, that's not a really great strategy for winning a football game, right? But in a way, it looks strange to the world when Christ says, be gentle, be humble, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. And in that, the leadership is going to have to start out with a few disciples themselves who can make disciples, who can make disciples, who can make disciples. If we aren't willing to start with a few and make it long, there's no sermon series, there's no program that's going to fix this.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. Um, I agree with you. I think in many of our churches get busy doing the things they can measure instead of doing these things. And so I think this is great. That was great advice. Roger, what do you think about all this? What are your thoughts on what do we do next?
Oh, I was just thinking of the next question for Dennis.
That's okay.
Well, because I have spent, and I'm working on my doctorate on this topic too, but because I'm very concerned about even worldview issues inside of our church. To me, you don't need a master's degree in apologetics to get back to one of a very core couple things. Is Jesus who he said he was? And if he is, how do we know who he is? Meaning, and can we trust the English version of the Bible that I've got that I'm reading this morning? Right? If Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity follows, and the Bible is true. And back to Dennis's point about surrender, the question is, am I going to view myself and culture through the lens of Scripture, or am I going to look at Scripture through the lens of the Bible? To me, if there's the centermost thing that I think about when I'm thinking about being in relationship with somebody, it's looking for opportunities to plant that seed or water that seed. And oftentimes in the world of apologetics or evangelism, it's thought of as pre-evangelism, right? Can I just remove a roadblock? And I think to the point that Dennis made some time ago, discipleship isn't just, okay, they converted and now they start come to a class. The question is, can I be in their life, in somebody's life, when the crap hits the fan for them? And that has a cost, but there is nothing more rewarding, because you're not going to talk them into the kingdom.
Yeah.
You're going to love them into the kingdom.
Yeah. Joe asked a great question too. I want to put up on the screen here. He says, who would you say has a responsibility to initiate a discipleship relationship once a person says he has given his life to Christ? More mature believer or a new believer?
My take on it would go this way. We are to invite. We should have a culture of inviting, but we should also have a culture a little bit like Legion to say, I want to follow you. I want to come with you. But we have neither today. Largely, it's people don't want to be troubled asking if they can come along with someone, and other people don't want to have to reach down and ask anybody to come with them. They expect people to run up and bow at their feet. We've got to change that culture. And so, Mike, I guess, I know we're not really at the wrap, but I guess my wrap point that I would set on the table is this. My goal for this book is, would 10% of the churches take a look at the issue of discipleship? Whether you agree with the way that we've presented it in the book or not doesn't matter. And consider the fact that the culture, which is only modifiable by leaders, has to change, or we're going to keep replicating like a Xerox machine, brittle, timid, burned out mutes who walk off the grid and have nothing further to do with Christ. Because, to Roger's point, you got to do you, right? You do you. And then we'll pick up whatever cherry-picked Bible passages we want, versus the reality that if the dude got up from the dead, this is a game changer and we've got to follow him.
That's a great point. Roger, do you have anything else you'd add? What you would say to Joe?
Well, I'm just sitting here going, well, that's probably a great point to wrap on. Joe says, who would you say has the responsibility, the more mature or the new person? Well, in one sense, I would say both have the same responsibility, but I think one of the marks of maturity would be that you get better at, or more courageous at, or at least more obedient at inviting, to Dennis's point. And I was just thinking about, the reason my brain was spinning is because I'm thinking about that across the life cycle. We think invitation could be, do you want to follow Jesus today? Invitation could be, hey, let's go have a beer. Right? But making it a point to invite them to go. Here's one example of my life. I've got a very dear friend I led to Christ last year. 15 years ago, he went to see the Mel Gibson Passion of the Christ movie with me. We may not have had 5 conversations in the last 15 years on that topic, and yet at a moment. So what's an invitation? Could be to a beer.
Yeah.
I love that. I love the point that you're making, which is stop looking for the microwave pizza answer on this. This could take years and a lot of ups and downs, and it's part of life. Go invite non-believers as well as believers to be with you.
Agreed. Yeah, I think,
and that could be it could be invite, like, to an occasion. It could be invite them to read their Bible. It could be invite them to say, hey, I mean, it could be to a thing. It could be to a someone, but I mean, I like the way Os Guinness puts it in his book on calling, when he says Jesus gives us this very simple thing that is an invitation and a command. Follow me.
Yeah. No, I think that's this is a great place to wrap it up. I agree with you, men, that I want to challenge all of us to do these things. So I'm grateful for you being part of this conversation. Dennis, would you please tell people how they can connect with you and where and when they can find the book?
So the ebook will be showing up in the spring. We're a little ways out. It'll be March, April when the ebook hits the servers. And the paperback's going to be, say again?
2022, just in case somebody's watching this.
2022, yes. Thank you. I miss you, Roger. And the paperback's going to be out in June and July of 2022 as well. If you want to reach out to us, we are probably about a month away from discipledilemma.com going live. So I'm grateful you guys gave me an early talk on this, but reach out to us or inundate Mike and Roger and they'll connect.
Yes. Yeah, I'll put some of this in the show notes, and we will try and update those as well, so that if you're watching this and it's into 2022, then the links down below should be good. I'm excited for what we get to do. I'm excited for how God brings us to each other, and I'm grateful for each of you being part of this conversation today. For those of you who are listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, please click the button to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It helps. Or to follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook, and give the video a thumbs up or a like, or share it with your friends. All those things help other people see this stuff so that they come and they join in this process of following Jesus. I believe that following him is where this all changes. It changes for each of us. So Dennis, I'm grateful for you being on here today. Roger, as always, I'm grateful for you partnering with us in this, and I'm thankful to everyone who watched this. If you want to learn more about us, check us out at followerofone.org. So
thank you, Mike.
Thank you both very much.
Good to see you, Roger.
Likewise.